I am excited to introduce our next speaker, Hope Bohanec. She has been active in animal protection and environmental activism for over 30 years. She's executive director of Compassionate Living and the host of the Hope for the Animals podcast. She co-founded the Humane Hoax Project and the Ahimsa Living Project, and she's published 2 books on the subject of humane washing and greenwashing. And on a personal note, I love Hope's podcast. I discovered it when I was newly vegan, and I learned so much from her, especially her Reason for Vegan series. I think it should be required listening for everyone. Such great information. So I was already a huge fan of Hope's, and then I decided to read her book, The Ultimate Betrayal Is There Happy Meat, and learned a lot from that. But I learned that she had been a tree sitter. She literally lived in a tree to protect the forest. Amazing. So Hope is an amazing, dedicated activist with a wealth of knowledge, and I'm honored to introduce her today and eager to hear what she has to share with us. So thank you, Hope, for all you do.
Thank you, Marion, so much. I appreciate that. And so I'm going to get started and let's see. Okay, so of course, because I've been doing this work with the Humane Hoax Project and these webinars, we have our chicken webinar. We also have the Humane Hoax webinar. I've written books on the subject of humane washing, greenwashing. So I speak about these things a lot. I research this stuff a lot, cage-free, free range, all of that. But what I mostly talk about, what we only talk about really in the project is the consumer side or the animals side, really. The treatment of the animals, how they're impacted by these labels, how they truly are living in cage-free and free-range environments, and also the environmental impact, greenwashing, so humane washing, greenwashing, the marketing of these products, right? The labeling, the industry lies around the labeling. But today I want to broaden that discussion and talk about an aspect of the humane hoax that I haven't really talked about, that the project certainly hasn't talked about, the Humane Hoax Project, and that's the animal advocacy side and how much energy and resources are going towards cage-free conversions and other welfare campaigns. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. It's an aspect of the humane hoax that we haven't addressed, but we're going to start today. So I do want to start, though, by asking, is cage-free better? So, I've done myself on-site investigation of cage-free and battery cage operations. This was back in Sonoma County a few years ago, and I saw numerous different situations and places just like this picture that you're seeing. This is a typical cage-free operation. And, so these birds are still coming from the heartless hatcheries. They are debeaked. They're still tossed around like canned goods. They often don't survive the first hours or days of life. The birds are still going to horrifying slaughter at a young age. So all of that still exists in cage-free, free range, all these labels. And it's really not clear that it's not clear, the evidence isn't clear if this provides the chickens with a better quality of life. There's numerous studies now, actually, that are coming out that show that the bird's experience can actually be even worse in cage-free systems, that they have higher rates of broken bones, smothering, feather picking, that even mortality rates can be higher in cage-free systems than battery cage systems. That means how many chickens die before slaughter. And already there's 500 million chickens that die before slaughter, before they even leave these barns and these facilities. And that could increase if we go all cage-free. And these, of course, are prolonged, painful deaths for these birds. So all this really reflects my own personal experience. So there's my investigation that I've done, these studies that are coming out, and so much more information about that, that it's just kind of unclear if cage-free is better. And certainly in some instances, it is worse. So why are animal advocates so focused, the animal advocacy community, why is that community so focused on farming conversions? And to get more information about this, that's all I'm really going to say about that aspect of it. It's just very much in a nutshell. I have numerous other presentations and podcasts around more information on this and kind of the totality of the chicken's experience with these alternative labels. So I really encourage you to watch our past chicken webinar presentations that I've given at this event and other places just to get more information if you want the full picture of that. But that's kind of the gist. But so right now, uh, there's been this kind of announcement going around about the chicken industry and how cage-free eggs are now 40% of the US market. And this has been going around animal advocacy groups as well as the industry has been talking about it. I took some screenshots here of just some announcements about it. Not only the Humane Society of the United States, but of course, lots of other prominent and large animal advocacy organizations are also talking about this. In fact, I got an email from one of these organizations asking if I would like to have the executive director on my podcast talking about this wonderful development of now all U.S. cage or egg the egg products are cage free, right? So that was interesting. It's like, well, I don't think you listen to my podcast, but so my question around this is, is this something that we should be celebrating? Well, let's talk about that. And actually, I just want to say something quickly, a couple disclaimers. And one is that I understand working for these welfare campaigns. I really do. I cannot blame anyone for wanting to work in the sector and on these campaigns. You actually see something happening, right? You get some kind of a little win when a company goes cage free, or when a company says that they'll only source from cage free sources. It's like this little victory in this very, very difficult uphill battle of being an animal advocate and not, and seeing so little progress. So I get it. I really understand wanting to be involved and to work and working in that sector. But I would also encourage anyone that is in that area to just step back, look at the big picture, and kind of hear what I have to say about this. And also, I'll say this too, that no one really knows. We don't know what's going to work. No one, and if someone does say this is definitely, and of course we're going to have our opinions and be adamant about things, but we're just making educated guesses. So just keeping that in mind, even though I get passionate about this, we're making educated guesses. But, I've been in this work for over 30 years. I've worked in all sides of this work. From back in the 90s, was doing radical direct action, and we're blockading slaughterhouses and shutting slaughterhouses down for the day. And I was arrested about 14 times during the 90s. And then I swung to the welfare side and I worked with the Sonoma County. I was the Sonoma County coordinator for Proposition 2 in California, which was one of the very first cage-free attempts, legislative attempts. That was back in like 2007 or 2009 or something, a long time ago. So I've seen a lot of sides of this work and been thinking about this deeply and studying it deeply. So I have some educated guesses to share, and I've come to some conclusions, thinking deeply about all this. And one of the conclusions that I have come to is that I really believe that the animal advocacy movement's ecology is out of balance. And I use this, I found this visual to kind of give you a kind of a feeling for what's going on. And really, that grassroots movement side should kind of be a little pebble, right? That's about how much energy and resources and money we're getting. The welfare campaign side is getting much, much more of the energy of the movement. And I'm going to start with my broader thesis, and then we'll get into some details. But, I think it might surprise some people to know that my critique is not necessarily of welfare itself. Okay. I do feel that welfare campaigns have a place and can be a tactical, a tactic that we can use in support of the movement. However, my critique is the amount, the excess that we are putting on welfare campaigns right now, that we are out of balance in our ecology. And so my critique is more with the degree, that the movement is shifted in support of welfare campaigns. We now have about 95, maybe to 99% of our donations and grant money and resources and jobs and energy and time going towards welfare and welfare campaigns. And this is a shift that's just happened the last maybe 15 years or so. It's becoming excessive. And, we really, I do believe we have to have a diversity of tactics. I agree with that, to have a healthy ecosystem. But the question should be, what should be central? What should be our central message? And what should be like our overarching message? And what should be supportive? And I think we have this all upside down right now, completely upside down. Vegan education, grassroots organizing, mass mobilizations. This should have a much bigger role than it currently does. And welfare should just be supportive tools. And I'll explain, I'll get deeper into all that. Okay. And just to say, I'm going to talk a little about social justice theory. I'm not going to get into it too deeply, but one interesting kind of part of that, the ecology of the movement, is something called the inside game and the outside game, and it's kind of being illustrated here, so I'll just touch on it. So the inside game is welfare campaigns. That working with corporate entities, corporate campaigns, welfare campaigns, working with the industry, legislative campaigns for incremental change, right? That's the inside game. And the outside game is that grassroots movement part, that vegan education and sanctuaries and mass mobilization, things like that. And I'm going to talk more about it too. But just that's another kind of way to look at it, the inside game and the outside game, and they need to be in balance, right? And right now they're very, very out of balance. Okay. So one thing that I feel very deeply about, that I think is so critical, is that we have to have individual transformative change. We have to change who we are, right? Socially and culturally. And when I say cultural, I'll give another a little aside here. I'm talking about meat culture, meat, dairy, and eggs, animal product eating culture. I'm not talking about ethnicity or religious culture in any way. So when I say culture, that's what I'm talking about, is kind of, meat eating culture, global meat eating culture. But we need so much more energy and resources around education, veganism, speciesism, right? That changes who we are. It changes our relationship to animals and our understanding that animals are individuals, and knowing them more on a deeper level. And that is so critical, I think, to actually having a vegan world, which should ultimately be our goal, right? Changing farming methods, passing legislation. These are often temporary measures. They're reversible actions. But changing culture, that has a much more lasting, permanent effect. Reforms address the symptoms. Veganism addresses the cause. Okay. Reforms are a Band-Aid, and they're easily reversible. There's been some very kind of intense, like scary bills going through on the federal level. And these bills, just in the last few years, these bills have kind of gone through, and one dies and another pops up. And those bills, if one of those federal bills gets passed, it could overturn all of these hard fought state animal welfare legislations, all these state legislations out there, all the state laws that are out there that are, in varying degrees, welfare laws for animals, state by state. This federal law could just wipe them all out. Millions of dollars of activist time, hundreds of, millions of dollars of activist money and donations and all of that just wiped away, right? Wiped away. So it's kind of a flimsy strategy, I feel, to be really putting our emphasis on this. So and I'll say too, human culture is reversible as well. I don't mean to say that it's not. However, I think that it's a heck of a lot harder, to change once that's set in the mainstream, who we are, what we believe, our ethics, right? That's harder to change than just these legislative reforms, which are so easily reversed. So, it, I guess I would say don't, focus on welfare reforms and assume that it's going to change the culture. We have to change people's hearts to understand animals as individual people, sentient beings, before we're going to make this shift. So, and I really believe these things are not going to come from welfare reform alone. Welfare reform alone is an impractical strategy. Okay, that's another point that I want to make here. So, what's our ultimate goal? Our ultimate goal, of course, is no animals suffering, no animals exploited, no animals commodified, right? Animal freedom. That's our ultimate goal. And I feel that our work needs to reflect that. Okay, so let's look at the trajectory of welfare reforms. So right now we're focused on the cage-free thing. Pretty much, that's a lot of the energy is on cage-free. Okay, so maybe another 10 years, 20 years till all the birds are out of cages. They're just in the horrible floor systems and they're all cage-free. Okay, what do we do then? Well, maybe we'll move on to crate-free pig production. So the pigs that are in gestation crates, and it is a absolutely horrible situation for these mama pigs being confined in the gestation crates. That's kind of getting some energy now. Companies going crate free. So we maybe shift to crate free, and we work on that for another 20 years, 30 years, 40 years until all pig production is crate free. And then what? There's debeaking, dehorning, castration. I mean, there are just endless horrors that animals face before anything is, even close to humane. And of course, then they're going to slaughter anyway. So, what is the trajectory here? What is the end goal? I mean, we could be working on these welfare campaigns for 100 years, 200 years, on and on, while we're still confining and killing animals for food. And I think the animal agriculture industry would love to do that dance, right? Sure. I mean, as long as they can still sell their products, sell their cage-free and crate-free products, I think this is it's a detrimental path to think that that's how we're going to get to our end point of animal freedom. I don't see it. Vegan education has to be critical in there, right? It has to be a critical part. Vegan education focuses on the intrinsic worth of individual animals and that we should not cause them suffering. I mean, welfare reforms kind of have a different message, right? I mean, just getting them out of the cages, well, then what? Maybe at some point, this is going to cause people to care enough to not want to eat them, not want to eat their eggs. How? I just don't see it. And I kind of feel like the welfare reform thing, it's almost like we're giving up. It's like a group of animal advocates kind of said, well, we're never going to get everybody to go vegan. So let's try to alleviate at least a little bit of suffering, a little bit of suffering from their, horrible, horrible lives. So I get that, but it's so minimal and not even clear if it's better. In some cases, it can be worse. And again, it's not going to get us to our end goal. So diverting our energies and our efforts into these welfare reforms, I don't ultimately see it liberating animals. There's not a clear path to liberation, to animal freedom. through welfare reforms alone. All right. Another point I'd like to make is that I feel that the animal agriculture industry is unreformable. I mean, these are reforms, right? And this is an industry that is unreformable because there is no industry without exploiting animals' bodies, right? How can that be reformed? There's no end point where you could ever be truly humane. And I think that's what consumers are hoping for, right? Of course. But we're kind of falsely implying that that is possible with these welfare labels and welfare campaigns. But we know that's not possible. We know there's no endpoint where you can have animal products and it be humane. There's just no way. So we're sending the wrong message. The message has to be that the only truly humane option is vegan, right? These strategies, these welfare reforms, I'm afraid too that they can kind of empower and embolden the industry, making animal products more attractive and taking us further away from animal liberation. So, if it's so bad for the industry, why are they working with you? Why would they be working with you? And that's one of the critiques is that, well, it cost, or one of the critiques of this argument, the welfare supporters would say, well, it costs the industry a lot of money to make these transitions, right? It's going to cost the industry a lot of money. So that's going to hurt them. But, this is where they can still, though, profit off of animal exploitation because they're getting more money from these products, right? So they're getting more money from people that are sympathetic, that want to stop animal suffering. And this, of course, gives the impression that they're moving in some wonderful direction. But, and there's also all this empirical data, the animals out of cages, more inches of space. So it looks like they're moving in this right direction. It's providing the industry tools so they can sell at those higher prices, right? New marketing, new consumers to market to. It quells consumers' concerns. This is all the humane hoax, right? But arguably, how can you help animals and the industry, right? The industry that exploits them. They have to be mutually exclusive. You can't help the animals and help the industry. I just don't see welfare leading us to animal freedom. So, I think the industry are probably saying, hey, sure, we'll go cage free. We're going to get the animal people off our back. We get the public to believe in our product again. We get to charge higher prices because it's humane, right? So yeah, hey, we're thinking this is going to be good for animal agriculture. We'll go cage free, no problem. But these industries, they can't be reformed. There is no animal industry without harm. Like the fossil fuel industry, there's no fossil fuel industry without harm to the earth. So, these industries are unreformable. They need to be dismantled and replaced. I think that the only way, the only collaboration that we should be having right now with the industry that should be happening is to support them to get out of animal farming, right? Transitioning to plant farming or simply out of the industry to something else. That's the only partnership, the only support, the only collaboration that should be happening, right? We can't get to our goal with welfare alone. There is not a clear path to animal freedom with welfare alone. Okay. But now there's so many companies that are getting on board with this. There's so many companies that are making promises to transition to cage-free and also to things like the Better Chicken Commitment. And this is a snapshot, a screenshot that I took off the Better Chicken Commitment's website, the Better Chicken Commitment. There's so many more logos than this. There was, just the logos just went on and on and on. I took a snapshot of some of the more recognizable ones. There's so many of these companies saying that they will do this work. But what is it? What are they doing? What are we asking them to do? So the Better Chicken Commitment, they have 3 to 7 years to transition to these very industry friendly regulations. And in the meantime, we're promoting them. We put their logo up here before they really do anything at all. And the Better Chicken Commitment isn't even cage free. So it's just even a step below that. I dug into the language and what they're asking these companies to do. And they don't mention anything about cage-free for egg-laying hens. The only thing that they say is that the maximum stocking density and I hate this language. I don't like talking about these individual beings with this kind of language, but this is how they talk. But it says the maximum stocking density of 0.6 pounds of bird per square foot. So however many square feet, however heavy the bird is how many square feet they get. So every 6 pounds, they get another square foot. It's such strange language. But often this just can mean enriched cages or, furnished cages, as they're sometimes called. There's a wonderful investigation by the Animal Justice organization in Canada just recently put out an investigation of enriched cages, and they do a wonderful job of they have a video and they compare like battery cage to enriched cage in video form and visual form to show how it's like the same, and these birds are still suffering. They look sad and sick and awful in enriched cages. And it does say in the Better Chicken Commitment that it prohibits all forms of broiler cages, right? Which, again, this is how these things are so industry friendly. The broiler chickens, the chickens that are raised for their meat, are on the floor systems, are in floor systems. The floor systems, like the picture that we had earlier of cage-free, where there's thousands of birds in a windowless warehouse, thousands of birds on the floor, that's just a floor system. And that's where the broiler chickens are, as well as breeder flocks. Breeder flocks are kept in the floor systems too. So there aren't broiler cages, really. So it's the language is there like, oh, look, they don't have the broiler chickens in cages. Well, they never were. It's the egg-laying hens that are in cages, and there's nothing said about that. So it's very industry friendly. Anyway, Mercy for Animals recently did an assessment of the Better Chicken Commitment's compliance, the company's compliance. It's been several years now. How are they doing, right? And they graded them from A to F. Chipotle's got a C, Starbucks got a D, Denny's got an F. So so here, this Better Chicken Commitment and the advocates that worked so hard to get them to get their logos on this page were promoting them, saying they're doing better for animals when they're not doing anything at all, hardly anything at all. And even if they do follow through and get an A on the Better Chicken Commitment, it's still so little. It's so little change, and these birds still suffer so horribly. And people don't realize it, because we're saying, hey, they're doing better for chickens, right? They're being good to chickens now. So it's all very frustrating. So I'm going to move on to another topic, and this is something that is very, very key and connected to all of this, and that is effective altruism. Now, I don't have the time to get in. This could be a whole other presentation, and maybe I will create another presentation all around this. But just to talk about this, I have to touch on it because it's so connected, and so it's kind of the fuel and the driving force behind a lot of this welfare connection. So what is this? So effective altruism is a philosophy. It's a much larger philosophy beyond, nonprofit work, beyond any animal advocacy work. And it comes from utilitarianism. If you're familiar with philosophies, I'm not gonna get into all that. But we're going to talk about how it relates to nonprofit strategy. And in nonprofit strategy, effective altruism boiled down is basically using logic and reason to make decisions not emotion, not, feelings. Don't let it be touchy-feely. Just look at the data, right? And then, how to do the most good for the least resources or the least energy or the least amount of money, right? So all of that sounds great. It really looks good on paper, right? Of course, we want to do the most good with the least amount of resources. Sure. Yeah, that sounds really great. However, when this gets applied in the real world and when this gets applied to animal advocacy, there's numerous problems that arise. And part of that problem is kind of that data-driven aspect of it, the numbers, the stats, the data being so essential to decision making. And that's how Cage-Free has become the darling of this welfare push of the funding, right? Because there's actually a lot of big tech money coming from through these EA. Effective altruism's acronym is EA, so you can also say EA. But there's a lot of tech money being donated through these EA funding entities that's coming into animal advocacy. And they want numbers, right? They want numbers. So an animal advocacy organization can say something like, hey, so with this cage-free campaign, we're going to be affecting 100,000 chickens or 500,000 chickens, right? So there's these big numbers, and EA loves that. But the word there that's really key is affecting. How is it going to be affecting these birds? Is it really going to be affecting them in a big way? Is it going to be really relieving their suffering? How is it affecting them, right? I think that's really key. The data gives the impression that incremental change is happening, that there's big numbers being helped, right? And that we're relieving suffering on this big scale. But is it really enough to warrant putting so many millions of dollars into it, right? And key here, is it really leading us to animal freedom? These are questions that really need to be asked. So there's so much more to this effective altruism thing. Time is limited, so I'm not going to get more deeply in. But I do want to say here that I don't think we should ignore data. I absolutely think that it's important to have stats and studies and figures. I love the work that Faunalytics is doing and other organizations that do these studies that get us information. That is important. I don't mean to I don't want to throw all that out the window. No, absolutely not. We need to be able to to know what's going on. And there are ways to quantify our activism. Absolutely. There is some activism that is quantifiable, and we should be looking at numbers. However, there are also strategies and tactics that are non-quantifiable, that are equally as critical, absolutely equally as critical. And we shouldn't just use stats and numbers as the only way to measure or monitor the ability or the effectiveness of a campaign, right? Of a social action. You can't predict human behavior. Emotion has to play a part. We can't ignore the emotion. It has to play a part. We can't just be focused on numbers. Emotion and people's reactions and all of that is so critical. Emotion creates change. Change the emotion behind the behavior, right? And vegan education addresses that. Welfare reforms, not so much. Emotion's so important. People react and respond very differently to different things. I mean, you may have a campaign or an entire project like an animal sanctuary, a farmed animal sanctuary, it may not reach big numbers, but it could reach key people, early adopters, like in a deep and emotional way that creates a passion and an excitement like nothing else can, right? That can't be quantified. That is so critical too to that cultural change I was talking about. And I mentioned animal sanctuaries because EA is famously critical of animal sanctuaries, and they have been losing money. Farmed animal sanctuaries have been losing money in the last 10 or so years with the rise of effective altruism, with the rise of data-driven activism. And I know sanctuaries that have lost all their funding I know a sanctuary that's lost all their funding and they're actually considering having to downsize or move or give their animals to other sanctuaries because they've lost their funding over all this. This is so important. It's so critical. It's, very, very important. The numbers become reductive. And funders start to feel that the only way to do activism is with big numbers of people reached, big numbers of animals affected. It doesn't take into account the myriad of non-quantifiable activities that are critical to that cultural shift, to changing who we are as a people. There's so much more to talk about in the EA thing. I don't really have time to get into it deeper, but I do recommend this wonderful book. It's called The Good It Promises, The Harm It Does. The Good It Promises, The Harm It Does, Critical Essays on Effective Altruism. I'll mention it again at the end. I have it in my ending resources slide. But this deeply affects animals, so please learn all you can about it. So there's a critique, I'm sure, that would come up at this point that is out there that someone would say, but, well, we've got to take small steps first. You can't just blanket say that everybody's going to go vegan overnight. There has to be small steps. You have to have incremental changes, right? I agree. Absolutely. I absolutely agree that you have to have small changes. However, I also believe that those small changes, those small steps have to move us in the direction of our end goal, right? They're not diverting into some other direction. They have to be moving in the direction of our end goal, right? So yes, you can take small steps, but the ask, right? The message, the ask, and we can have small asks and large asks. But that ask, that message has to be to continue, cannot be to continue to commodify and kill animals, right? Buying cage-free, it's a small ask in the wrong direction. The only incremental message that we should have is to be weaning people off of animal products. Reduce your animal product intake, reduce to eliminate, right? Different forms of farming, different species of animals, different labels on the animal products, right? I just don't think these are paths to animal freedom. Again, we should have small asks, that's fine, but those small asks should be to reduce your amount of animal products, reduce to eliminate. That's going to move us in the right direction. There was an academic study actually in the Journal of Environmental Economics and Policy. It was called Animal Welfare Labeled Meats Are Not a Stepping Stone to Animal-Free Diets, Empirical Evidence from a Survey. Now, this is where, I love academics so much. My husband is an academic. He's amazing. He does all this kind of work where they dig in deep and they get all this amazing information. And then there's about 20 people that hear about it. And that's it. And it's like, people need to know about these studies, right? The academics are doing such amazing work. People need to pay attention. So anyway, so this was an incredible study. I'll just read something from their abstract here. This is a quote from the abstract. Okay. And they asked people, they went and asked numerous people about their diets and about these welfare labels, about cage-free, free-range labels. I can't remember specifically which labels they asked about, but they asked about welfare labels and how they felt about it and all this kind of thing. Here's the quote from the abstract. The survey shows that, the survey shows very weak and mixed evidence that the introduction of animal welfare labels could be counterproductive for animal welfare. In the long run, it could result in a locked-in equilibrium with less harmful social norms, i.e., a suboptimal state of animal farming that still contains animal suffering. So, and that locked in, that's, I think, key there. That's what these welfare reforms are doing. That's what the industry is hoping, is banking on with these welfare reforms, right? They want to lock in animal products in the long run. So this study is saying that these labels could be doing that, locking in animal exploitation, animal products, and animal farming for the long run and not leading us in the direction of animal freedom. Okay. I'm sure my time is probably possibly going over. I don't even know what time it is, but I'm gonna push through here. We're getting close to the end. So in conclusion, we really need to put more emphasis, more energy, more support on grassroots vegan education. And I list things here, and there is so much more: mass mobilization, protest, presentations, webinars, podcasts, social media, animal sanctuaries, veg fest, conferences, leafleting, tabling. There's so much that needs our support, that needs our money and attention. So we've got to talk about ethical veganism, teach about speciesism, focus in on the intrinsic worth of individual animals. Having been in this movement for 30 years now and seeing the trajectory that we have been on in the last like 10, 15 years towards welfare, I am very concerned. You know, I can't tell you how many activists talk to me about this, and I've talked to about this privately, that we're very concerned about the direction that and what's happening in the movement right now, but they're afraid to speak publicly for fear of losing funding. This is getting very serious. And so I hope for myself that I have not hurt Compassionate Living's chances for getting funding, but in honor of Karen Davis, that we are memorializing this day and with this event. Karen was never afraid to speak up. She had the courage to speak up about anything that she felt was important, and so I'm channeling her courage today to speak up about this, and I hope that more people can feel comfortable and do feel comfortable doing it, because we have to have a shift. We have to have more grant money and resources and funding and donations going towards the grassroots. We are starving and need it. And chicken microsanctuaries. And we just had this whole panel on chicken microsanctuaries, caring for and loving these wonderful chickens, giving them homes, forever homes. The money is flowing away from us all right now. So help us out. So I'll wrap it up here again, just saying that, we have to focus on that cultural shift of who we are. And just last thought, we want people to reach for that veggie burger. We certainly do. And all that, the food advocacy, all that is important too. But without the societal concept of animal liberation, animal freedom, and the understanding that animals are sentient beings and deserve to live free of human imposed suffering, without all that context, while they're reaching for that veggie burger, I feel like we could just so easily lose any progress that alternative proteins have helped to create, right? We could just slip away. It could just all slip away without that cultural shift. And yeah, so anyway, we've got to dismantle the animal, agricultural, industrial complex, not work with them, not help promote them, but dismantle them. And my organization, Compassionate Living, is, of course, devoted to this idea of identity transformation, individually, culturally, collectively, creating a compassionate vegan world. So please consider supporting us. We certainly need it. And I'll just give some recommendations for further information if you're interested in going deeper into all this. There was a recent video that was wonderful from Animal Think Tank. Animal Think Tank's doing some great work on kind of the ecology of the movement and the social justice aspect, social justice theory aspect of this. Leila Kassam is one of their founders, and she did a video recently that was really interesting, focusing on the ecology and the movement, and also speaking about how we're out of balance. Here's that book that I was talking about on effective altruism, The Good It Promises, the Harm It Does. I encourage you to get that book. It's an edited anthology with numerous chapters from different angles on the subject. And someone else that I want to give a little plug for is Emily Moran Barwick. She does some amazing, very well-researched videos and articles on Bite Size Vegan, and she does a lot of work around cage-free as well. So check all of that out. Okay, I am going to end with a quote from my podcast, giving a plug for my Hope for the Animals podcast. This was a quote from my podcast. It needs to be known that even with a cage-free label, chickens still suffer. The cage-free label is misleading, and from the beginning of their lives to the end, there are so many cruelties beyond the cage. Thank you.